Welcome back, EGG202 class. So for this video tutorial, we'll be doing C# WinForms, but in this program we're going to be going over radio buttons and how to use them in our program and just how to generally set up events involving radio buttons and so forth. Okay, so in this program I'm going to set up an input box where you can read in some values. I'm going to have a few radio buttons to compute a few different trigonometric functions, so sine, cosine, tangent. I'm going to be using radio buttons to have the user select which trig function you want to apply. Then I'll go over how to add events to those radio buttons to add more cooler functionality with radio buttons. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing, well actually I first went to my form and gave it the text trig radio buttons, so then that will appear at the very top. I also gave the form a name, FRM trig radio, just to give it some proper names like that for the actual form name. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add first a label that'll prompt the user to enter some degree amount, of course in radians, because radians are the default values you use for trig functions in C#, but of course if you want to use degrees you can convert radians into degrees, but just to make things simple I'm going to go ahead and just use straightforward radians. Then I'll have a few radio buttons, so you can click it if you want to do a sine, cosine, or tangent of that radian amount. Then of course a few buttons to activate the event to calculate, and of course put a label for the output. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and actually insert all of these into this canvas. So I'm going to now click on my toolbox and then select the object. So I use the common controls because we're going to be using mostly common controls for most of our projects for this lab. Let's go ahead and click on label. I'll put it right there. I'm going to give this label, I'm going to give it just a text. So enter radians, like that. I'm not going to give this label an actual name. I'm not going to access this label in my program or do anything to it in my program. So I'm going to keep it just for now label 1, good enough for a name. Then I'm going to select my text box, which is right there, click and drag, and of course make sure it aligns somewhat. So of course you want to make it look decent, so that looks about aligned. Now this one I'm going to give it an actual name. So I'm going to be pulling pulling a number from this text box. I'm going to go ahead and just say txt, I'll call this maybe radians. Yeah, txt radians. That's a good name for this text box. Awesome. Then I'm going to go to my toolbar. I'm going to now select a radio button. Let's see if I can find it in this list. Somewhere it's not checkbox. Radio button, there it is. I'm going to go ahead and click on this and drag it and try to align it with this. I'm going to now just maybe right click and then just copy it a few times. I don't have to keep going back to the toolbox every second. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of link these together like this. Maybe I'll sort of put this over here so it kind of matches, and then maybe I can sort of, yeah, I mean, it looks a little bit weird, but at least it kind of does look somewhat aligned, I guess. Okay, so this radio button, I'm going to go ahead and click on the actual radio button first and go to the name. I'm going to call this, I don't know the actual, I'm going to say just RD for radio, RD, and then I guess sine. And then of course the text I'm going to give to this radio button. If I can find the text field, let's take a close look at it. I probably skipped it a few times, but it's always a little bit of a pain. Oh, there it is, text. I'm just going to put in just sine, display sine. Then I'm going to go ahead and have this one be cosine. So I'm going to go to I'm going to call this just RD cosine. I guess RD, I'm going to go with that as the abbreviation for radio buttons. I guess it doesn't matter as long as it's consistent. This will be cosine. That's how cosine is spelled, I believe. All right, I'm just going to go with just cosine, just easier. And then I'm going to now, for this third one, it's going to be just tangent, so just tan for tangent. I'll use capital T for that. And then I'm going to give it the name RD tan. Okay, so the thing is, again, not real. I'm going to just update this a little bit so it aligns with that. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so now we have our radio button set up. Let's go ahead and maybe put a label for our output label. So I'm going to now just go ahead and find a label, drag it over here, and just for now call it, name will be LBL output, label output. I'll keep this text label to right there so I know where it is on my canvas. Of course, I'm going to have my form load set up. When the form loads, I'm going to clear this label out right away. I'm going to go ahead and add my two buttons over here. Just put my button, so I'll align this nicely and sort of widen this out. Looks pretty good. Let's right click on this. So we have another button that's the same dimensions, so it looks pretty good. It's going to be, of course, my calculate button. So I'm going to give it a name, BTN calculate. Oops. And then I'm going to look at the text field and just try calculate. Now let's go ahead and make a close button, I suppose. So I'm going to go ahead and sew a text. I'm going to call this maybe close, or you can call it close, exit, quit, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to go ahead and then just say BTN close. Then I'm going to go ahead and maybe sort of shrink this a little bit so it doesn't look too weird. I think this looks pretty decent. So there we are. So again, the first you want to, of course, create all of your, you want to create your canvas and create your UI first. At least I recommend making UI create your UI first, add the components and name them properly first. And then of course, now we can go ahead and actually write the code to add functionality to this program. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on our form and double click on the form right now to sort of create the method for form load. And it creates that form load method. So all I'm going to do in this form load is I'm just going to just pretty much have where's LBL output.text equals a blank string. The whole point of that is when this loads, I don't want that label to show. But I do want the label 2 text to appear there because I want to be able to, maybe if I wanted to actually click on it and sort of modify the attributes for it or move it around somewhere, I don't want it to be blanked out because then it becomes rather complicated to actually access this label. Also, when I first load this program, none of these radio buttons are going to actually be clicked on. So let me go ahead and just run this so you can see what's going on. If I run this, you can see here, okay, the label is cleared out, perfect, but we see that none of these buttons are actually initially clicked. I mean, of course I can click on them, but I want to make it where we maybe have one of them by default automatically clicked. So let's maybe have it so the sign is clicked automatically as well, or signs automatically enabled. So let's go ahead and close this. Let's go back to our form load. I'm going to have rd sign dot, I think it's checked equals true. So it's going to sort of have this radio button checked on load. Let's go ahead and run this and see if it does actually do that correctly. And we can see here that yes, sign is automatically set by default. So of course you can, you can click on something else, but by default it will always have a sign selected. So, okay, so far so good. Let's go ahead and add more functionality to this. So just to make a few things simple, I'm going to go ahead and just put this, I'm going to write this close button method because, well, it's a very simple one to write. Double click on that, creates my close button click event method. I'm going to say this dot close. So of course it's going to close the app if I click on that button. So, okay, so we have the easy one so far done. Alrighty, so now let's go ahead and now write the calculate. This one's going to be the more bulk of your actual program. So double click on this calculate button, which creates that event, that click event for calculate button clicks. So there we are. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to pull in, of course, the user will enter some amount in radians. Now, of course, I could have made this program where you can read an amount in degrees, and then of course you can convert it into radians, but I'll just make it simple because I don't want to really overdo this video too much. So we'll just keep it at radians, just it's not really a big deal. So anyway, let's go back to, let's right click and go back to view code. There we are. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and say double radians equals, remember we have this txt radians dot to string Actually, a dot text, my mistake, sorry, dot text. And then of course, it's going to be in a string format. So we have to convert it to a double. So that's pretty simple. Just double dot parse. And there we are. So whatever is actually stored, so whatever is actually put into this text box, we're going to sort of txt_radians.text will pull that in as a string, and then we go ahead and convert that into a double. Now, from the last video, I went over, let's say if it's not a valid number, we can gray out the calculate button, but I'm not going to do that right here because it's the same concept. If you wanted, we can of course have a try parse, and then if it returns a false, gray out the button. So we can have an event for the actual text box, like in the last video, but we don't need to cover that. We already covered that earlier in the last video. Let's go ahead and go over this one. So the first thing I'll do right now is create maybe a set of statements. I'm going to say if radio sign dot checked. Oops. So if the sign button was checked, radio button, then we're going to do some bit of code. Then else if the cosine button is checked, we do some code, and then I'll have an else if, one more. If the radio button tangent is checked, then run this code. So for radio buttons, only one of them can be checked. You can't have multiple. So we have, what's it called? Let me just look at this for a second. Oops, I'll go back over here. So for toolbox, if we have the checkbox, then you can have multiple checkboxes, but for radio buttons, only one can be clicked. So that's just, just making sure in case we're confused about that. So now we have this set up. Let's go ahead and now compute the actual sort of amount. So maybe I'll create another variable over here. Just call it double result. Then I'll just say result equals math. Wow, it's actually pretty cool how it does that. So anyway, there it is. So math.sign radians. It does the sign of that radians amount. So I'm going to go ahead and now do the same thing for result. Wow, so the machine learning, right there, it automatically knows I'm trying to do cosine. That's actually pretty cool. So again, machine learning for the win for Visual Studio 2022. A result, I like that. Actually, it does minus equal, which is not correct, but still, hey, it still, did all that for us. So awesome. I guess I'm going to now put the output here. So I'm going to say LBL output dot text equal sort of, let me save and put a $sign here. So radians, actually I'm going to say sign of that radians amount equals, and then that result. Now maybe I'll put an end of line as well. I don't know, it's probably not important to put that there, but what the heck. So all we're doing is we're outputting sign of that radian amount equals whatever is stored in that cost. So I'm going to go ahead and just maybe copy and paste this a few times since I don't have to retype all of this. Although machine learning for this might be able to already tell I'm trying to do. But let's just go ahead and I'll just write this here. So anyway, then we have that for cosine. Then we have it for tangent. So that's it. Very simple. So what happens in this button click, we first pull the input from that text file, then we check which radio button was clicked on. So if it was a sine was clicked, we run this code. If the cosine was checked, run that code. And if the tangent one was checked, run that piece of code. That's all we're doing. Very simple. So radio buttons are not that complicated. Let's run this. So I don't know the exact amounts. I'm just going to assume that it works. Let's try let's say 2 radians in sine will give us that number. Click on cosine, calculate, gives us that number. Click on tangent, calculate, gives us that number. I'm going to assume that those are all correct. So we'll just go ahead and just say that's the right answer. And of course, if I put in a different number in, I put in, let's say 3, I don't know, 3.5, I guess. Put in cosine, cosine 3.5 equals this. So 3.5 radians. So anyway, and of course we can convert this. We can use degrees instead, or we can have a degree amount instead of radians being passed and convert it into radians. But there's no point. It's really rather nothing too much to it. So there we go. So again, nothing too complicated there. So that was the first part of this video. We just simply know how to check, which one was clicked. So now I'm going to modify this this app in a second, because now what I'm going to do is, instead of having a calculate button that runs this, I'm going to have it possibly, if I click on this button, it's going to automatically run sort of the the cosine of 3.5 and whatnot. So instead of having a calculate button, let's go ahead and do it by having an event where I click on this button, it'll activate some event. Let's go ahead and work on that part next. Alright, so I guess what I'll do right now is I'll just I guess I'll keep this calculate button there. I mean, I could remove it, but I'll remove it just ways as we're not tempted to click on it by accident. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'm going to go back to my form load, and I'm going to actually not have I'm going to have all of them not checked. So just to be safe, what I'll do right now is I'm going to say the cosine button dot checked equals radio button tangent button dot checked. I'm going to set them all equal to false actually. So I want to make sure that when the form does a load, none of them will be checked. So once you check on one of them, then it's going to actually, run the program. So, just because. So let's go ahead and click on this start and see what happens. None of them are checked. Now I think by default it might not check them all, but sometimes it might give a default check to one of these. So just to be safe, I'm going to write this code right there, sorry. That's going to automatically just ensure that all the radio buttons are unchecked. So now to add sort of functionality, I'm going to click on, let's say, the sign button. I'm going to double click on this one. So double clicking on the actual object is going to assign some type of event. Most likely the most common event. So for text boxes, as if you change the text box, but everything else though, it's some kind of a click event that's going to happen. Let's double click on this sign radio button and see what happens. And when this button is checked, we're going to run some code. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste this. So in this function, I'm going to create a local variable just for the radians and result. I'm going to pull the value in from this radians field. And I'm going to go ahead and just maybe copy and paste this as well. So let's go ahead and just sort of put that there. So that's all this is going to do. We're just going to bring in that value from the text box, convert it to a double, calculate the sign of it, and then output that amount. That's all. Let's go back to the form again. Double click on a cosine button or cosine radio button. I'm gonna go ahead and sort of copy and paste all of this, since it will be relatively the same amount of work. So we're going to now do a cosine instead of sine. So just update that, and then for the output, just put cosine right there, like that. And of course, for the last but not least, for tangent, let's double click on that. Creates the event for the checked event. I'm going to, again, I think I already copy and pasted, but I'll just copy and paste again. I'll just highlight that. And I'm going to just apply that tangent function on this radian amount. So all we're doing, each function is going to sort of pull the value in and then calculate its respective trig function and output to the label. That's all. So really very simple. So we're just simply running this code when this button is clicked. If cosine is clicked, it runs this. If tangent is clicked, it runs this. That's all we're doing. So nothing fancy there. Let's start this program. I'm going to first make sure I enter some value before I click on any of these. I'm going to say maybe, I don't know, 2.2. I'm going to click on sine, and there it is. If I click on cosine, you can see it updated. If I click on tangent, bam, updates that. Now if I go ahead, let's see if I try, let's say 2.5, and I click on tangent again, we'll actually rerun this. I'll have to click away actually. So I have to click away to cosine, and then get a tangent to actually run. Okay, so I guess that's okay. So the event is actually going to be check change. So I have to have changed actually. So I could have made an event where if you just click on it, it runs it, but this event actually only handles if we update it, if you change it. So if it was off and I clicked it on, so only works if I click on a button, a radio button that wasn't clicked before. But we could add an event to handle it if we just click on it, even if it's already been checked, to make it work. But that's really not the big deal. Really, the issue you want to focus on is just this for right now. So anyway, This sort of is a very simple tutorial. I went over just how to handle radio buttons. I hope this video did sort of, help you or give you an understanding of that. So I guess thanks for watching and take care until next time.